All right. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, please sign into the attendance. Question if we get started. All right, let's recap a little bit. So we are actually coming close to the end of the unit on free speech. Believe it or not, we're just about done with it. When we get back from spring break, we'll have one more class on freedom of expression, and then we go on to religion. So basically, the first half of the class is basically done. Just sort of scary to think about, but here we are. Uh, at the end of class, after we're done, I want to go over midterm a bit. We're not going to have a midterm. I'll show you what a midterm looks like and what the file is going to look like also, but I want to do today's material first. All right, so just to sort of recap our 6 kind of lenses we've been talking about now for weeks, we sort of expanded upon it last class. I want to just make sure your notes are complete. What the Roberts Court has signaled in recent years is that they're not adding any new categories here. The categories that exist are those that are going to be fixed, we think. There's libel, there's fighting words, there's the Brandenburg Standard, and there's also a category of fraud. You cannot engage in fraud. That's always a criminal activity, okay? The fourth one we also expanded upon as well, that there's different types of scrutiny that are involved. There's often strict scrutiny, but sometimes you apply maybe something that's intermediate scrutiny, which is a commercial speech context. But again, the court has signaled that we're not really going to be applying that. In the case of Nifla versus Becher, this is about the pro-life centers, the crisis pregnancy centers, the court basically ignored all those other decisions about commercial speech. So for the most part, the mere fact that speech comes from the corporation and is in some commercial context doesn't really matter at all. Okay? Everyone okay with those? All right, so the topic today is broadly called freedom of expression. But you'll see the topic is actually called in the readings freedom of association. Freedom of association. So let's just look at our First Amendment for a second, all right? Okay. You have no establishment religion. You can't prohibit free exercise. You can't abridge the right of freedom of speech or the press or the right of people to assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. Now, we've not focused on these last two much at all. In fact, I barely mentioned them. But the right to peacefully assemble seems to say the right to gather with whom we want, right? Want to meet with people, I can meet with them. And petition the government for redress of grievances. This is maybe a little obscure, but it means you can basically complain to the government. You can petition through writing. You can petition through speaking. But you can complain. Back in England, this is the way you got things done. If you wrote a letter to the king, maybe he'd grant you relief, maybe not. But you could petition for a redress as to address your problems. But as I look at this text, and you can look at it also, I don't see anything about association. There's assembly, right? You can gather the people you want. But where is this freedom of association coming from? Start there. Amy, what's the basis for this freedom of association?
Because an association is an active assembly.
Are any of these cases we read today about getting together and assembling with people?
Not physically, but
Did Alabama prevent people from joining the NAACP?
no, they just
Jonathan, where in the text of the 14th, I'm sorry, where in the text of the First Amendment is there any discussion of freedom of association? There's not. Well, what does this mean, freedom of association? What does association actually mean? Is that greater than assembly, or that's just another way of saying assembly?
I would put it as something within assembly as a category.
Okay. Why?
Because generally when you're assembling with somebody, you are associating yourselves with them.
But does association require physical presence?
No.
Does assembly require physical presence?
Yes, it does.
So which is bigger, which is smaller? Which is like the, during a Venn diagram, which is on the outside? Is assembly here and associations here, or the assembly outside and associations inside?
Assembly would be outside.
All right, so Anna, I'll ask you the same question. How do you get from a freedom of assembly to a freedom of association? What's the basis for that?
Well, I feel like all these people they're assembling and associating for like a reason or a cause.
And what's that cause? What are they trying to do?
I guess isn't that kind of also like they're like trying to speak their
Expression. They're speaking. So one can speak by himself, or he can speak as a group. All right. So Nick, is assembly, is association, what does association add? It's not already there. In other words, why couldn't you say these are just free speech cases, right? That requiring the NAACP and the NAACP to require their donors is burdening their speech. Why do we need this other thing of association? What does it actually add to the equation?
I think it talk about a different level of scrutiny. I think that,
Forget scrutiny. I'm talking about just really basic. What does association add that's not already in the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly? What's it add?
I don't necessarily think it adds something different.
So then, Cody, then why are we wasting our time with this topic? In other words, if these are all just speech cases, why don't we just say the government can't burden your speech? Why does this matter?
Maybe because the government knows that it is not true.
Okay, well, let's take this example. Is Alabama in any way telling the NAACP what they can say? Are they prohibiting people from joining the organization? So then, are free speech rights being violated?
I guess it.
But again, are they saying that you can't have a meeting of the NAACP in the state? You can't gather, you can't assemble together, you can't have a meeting. Is that anywhere in the law here? So then what exactly is being burdened?
Really, their right to remain private.
Privacy. Ooh. So Dylan, remember common law, right? You raised your hand a couple minutes ago, but got you eventually. Remember common law, right? What is this? What is this right of privacy? What is this thing? I've not heard of this thing before.
Right.
This is in the Constitution?
Yeah.
It is, really?
Uh-huh.
Show me. I got one right here. Show me.
There's no way out. It's 14.
14th Amendment. Where? Okay, show me. I know a lot about the 14th Amendment today in the news. What?
It's what's it? Man, it's so stupid word. It's like falls under the number.
The penumbra. So the penumbra. So what year? The Alabama case is what, from 19, was it 58, 57? 58, yeah, 58. Griswold v. Connecticut, I think was 64, memory? 65 is off by year, sorry. Yes, 65. So Alabama case is 58. And then about 6 or 7 years later, we get to Griswold, which discusses this right of privacy. And the right of privacy comes, and actually Justice Douglas was not so clear. He spoke of the emanations and penumbras of the Bill of Rights. It wasn't even the 14th Amendment. He didn't actually cite the 14th Amendment. That was actually Harlan's concurrence in Griswold, which I'm sure you all remember very well. Okay. But it was actually based on the penumbras of the Bill of Rights. But Jacob, what does privacy have to do with free speech? Why is this even a First Amendment doctrine?
Because the act of gathering together and sort of all co-signing this speech makes it more powerful.
But isn't the opposite of privacy? Isn't there strength in numbers? Like people...
Well, if you don't have the right to keep your co-signing secret, when co-signing some controversial opinions might to people, and then the subsequent attacks for believing those.
So you're worried about
chilling
repercussions of joining this organization, but why is any of that based on speech? Why, in other words, why the heck am I teaching this topic in a First Amendment class? What's this? I'm looking at the First Amendment. got stuff in there, religions, speech, assembly. What does keeping your names private from the government have to do with any of this stuff?
There's the last part about redressing grievances.
But petitions are signed. You sign a petition to the government complaining about stuff. It's the exact opposite of what we're saying here. Shania, what's the, again, I'll go back to my first question I gave to Amy a few minutes ago. Is there a textual basis in the First Amendment for right of association?
Not explicitly,
Not explicitly. Okay, go on a little bit more. You want to say something else?
but I think that the idea behind the First Amendment extends beyond what is just literally written.
Okay.
And so you want to protect their privacy because if people are worried about their beliefs being exposed, they might be less likely to act out on those beliefs.
Ah, okay. So it's not about the First Amendment itself. It's about some sort of number, if I may, from the First Amendment. Can you do that one, Dylan?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I still don't know what it means really.
You know what a penumbra? You know what a penumbra is?
No. Drop off number.
Oh God, did you guys not learn this in college? I do everything.
It's just general.
Yeah, I have a video for that. Okay. I'm gonna play this because you asked. I love my students. Right. Always feel I'm picking up slack whenever I teach this stuff. This topic in particular. Okay. Here. You can watch a full video later. Here's a short clip about what a penumbra is. There we go. You're welcome. Make sure the sound works. All right.
He wrote, quote, specific guarantees in the Bill of Rights have penumbras formed by emanations from those guarantees that help give them life.
Right? Remember this? Now you get the lesson.
Astronomy guide. An emanation refers to a ray of light. During a lunar eclipse, the umbra refers to the darkest part of the shadow formed when the Earth orbits between the sun and the moon. The penumbra refers to the lighter part of the shadow, where some of the emanations from the sun are visible.
Got it? You don't learn that in con law?
We didn't have
We
to
flew
figure
right over that.
What were you learning? What else? Anyway, sorry, going back to this. Save us, Eric. All right, so when we're talking then to Shania's point about penumbras, about a right of association, is this really a First Amendment thing or a 14th Amendment thing?
I guess you could argue 14, but what I would say is that it starts with a free exercise.
Of religion? Want to try to answer again? Is this a First Amendment thing or a 14th Amendment thing?
I think 14.
Yeah. So look, I always get in trouble whenever I teach this topic. This everyone agrees with me, but if you actually read the court's opinions, they talk about liberty in the 14th Amendment. Do you notice that? They're not talking about the First Amendment. They don't even mention it. This is a substantive due process doctrine, right? Again, I made this point, and Eugene Volk yelled at me. I usually agree with Eugene, but not on this one. This is about privacy, freedom of association, and privacy. I think you all said it actually quite well. And this is sort of decided in the run-up to Griswold. And along the same times, you had a lot of Fourth Amendment cases discussing the right of privacy. Remember Katz versus United States? Do you take Crim Pro yet? Okay, you'll learn about this. About a reasonable expectation of privacy. Does that sound familiar? Whatever reason, the 50s and 60s and 70s, privacy was like the big buzzword. And it sort of formed the basis of a lot of the court's doctrine. Fourth Amendment, freedom of association, the contraception decisions, later an abortion case with Roe, right? That was sort of what the court was thinking about. So I'm going to teach you about freedom of association in the First Amendment class, but I just want to be very clear. It's not this. It might be a penumbra with the First Amendment. Maybe Shania is right, but it's not actually in the First Amendment. All right. And once we get that, this case becomes a little bit easier to sort of square away. This doesn't fit with our 1 through 6 thing, right? this, right? The classes today doesn't map onto this thing at all. Why? Because Alabama is not actually burdening anyone's speech directly. Directly. Instead, what's happening here is that they're requiring disclosure of information. And that disclosure by itself doesn't stop you from joining the group. It doesn't prevent you from donating to the group. All it does is create the risk that if someone finds out about your joining or giving them money, that there might be consequences for you. So really, this is about privacy. But it's also about anonymity, Jamar. Let's talk about anonymity for a minute. Why is anonymity significant? Why is that an important thing that the court seems keen on sort of policing?
I guess in the Alabama versus NAACP case, you know, if someone's in the NAACP, then they get negatively treated in the state of Alabama.
Well, I'll just play devil's advocate for a minute. Shouldn't people be willing to take positions and stand for what they believe in?
I think sometimes you don't want to explicitly put yourself out there if you're not ready to stumble all the way in.
So,
It might not be your time to strike, you know what I'm saying?
so, but doesn't the state have an interest though in sort of knowing who's articulating what? And I could just change the fact pattern instead of disclosing, you know, who's joining the NAACP in Alabama in the 1960s, who's giving money to various political candidates, right? One of the challenges with this topic, and it's the reason why I like having the Alabama case followed by Buckley, followed by the modern AFP case, is it sure shows what sort of risk we're willing to disclose. All right. So Aaron, let me try another question for you. As a general matter, right? When you vote, voting might be an easy example. Is that public? Elections tomorrow, right? When you go to vote, is that public?
The ballot that I cast is guarded pretty
Okay.
carefully, it's regulated.
Okay. So if you vote in a primary, I won't ask which one, but is it a matter of public record if you're Republican or Democrat or Independent, whatever party you want to join?
I believe it is.
Yeah. Is that problematic?
I don't see it as so.
Why not?
It,
What if someone's a member of, I don't know, wants to be with the Communist Party of America?
More power to them.
More power to them. Okay. Yeah, more power to people. Okay. All right. So this topic is kind of a little bit fuzzy because a lot of the information that we have is pretty much public. Some of it's not. Right. So the two cases, or actually the three cases we're studying today, involve membership lists. Actually, four cases. The McConnell one's so short, but they involve membership lists. And throughout history, membership lists have been extremely important. I mentioned the communist example quite deliberately, but in the 1950s, there was a concern that communists were infiltrating the government. And there was actually a committee of Congress that would make people testify. Are you now a member of the Communist Party? Were you ever a member? Demanding lists of people who are part of these parties. Right? But that sort of thing isn't even new. Even when we go back to the framing of the Constitution, right? The Federalist Papers, who wrote them? Oh, it's Hamilton, Madison, Jay. Well, yeah, we know that. Who signed them? Publius, right? The Federalists were written under a pseudonym, a fake name. The Anti-Federalist Papers likewise were written under pseudonyms. It was a very common form of advocacy for the framing to use a fake name when writing, so as not to get yourself in trouble. Even during the movement for independence, people who spoke out against the crown wrote under pseudonyms. Why? Because they don't want to be executed for treason, right? So there were very good reasons to speak out in this regard. Okay, everyone with me so far? All right, Ryan. We're missing Julianne. We're missing audio. We're short people today. All right, Ryan, you want to give me the facts, please, in the Alabama case?
So the Attorney General wanted to.
Attorney General of who? The United States?
Attorney General.
Thank you.
And basically sought an injunction to block the operation in Alabama.
Well, take a step back. Take a step back. You jumped like 3 steps in. Okay. Have you taken corporation law? Who is taking corporate law? I'll come back. So, what's the first thing you have to do when you want to form a corporation? You file a charter. Who do you file it with? Yeah, the Secretary of State. And what sort of information do you have to give the Secretary of State? Yeah, and what else? Names of. What are those things called? What do you call those people who run a corporation? Officers, right? Officers of the United States. No, wrong thing. Officers of the corporation, right? Very, very basic, right? So when you want to form a charter, a corporation, you have to give a charter to the state, and you have to include certain people: the president, secretary, the treasurer, right? You have to state the purpose of it. That is automatic. Okay, Ryan, is anyone challenging the power of a state to require a corporation to incorporate and put a charter with the very basic information? Is anyone ever challenging that?
In this case?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Now, did the NAACP ever actually register a charter in Alabama?
No.
They didn't. Why do you think they didn't do that?
Because they would have to disclose those names and all.
Yeah, so they were even opposed to not just the rank and file members. They were opposed to giving the directors' names because they frankly didn't want to share the information because they were afraid of being persecuted and worse. I mean, people getting murdered. This is not a light time. Okay, very, very scary right now if you want to put your information here. Okay, but then the Alabama AG sought to block the group from organizing in the state again because they didn't file the basic paperwork. Okay, so Leighton, if the case had just sort of ended there and Alabama tried to stop the group from organizing because they didn't file the paperwork and they did nothing else, how would this case have turned out? Well, I'm saying, would they have had a First Amendment or some other 14th Amendment claim if the only issue in this case was you must file a charter with the state? Why not?
Because there wouldn't have been the later.
Would requiring the state to submit the names of the directors and officers, would that be content neutral? Is there anything discriminatory about just requiring directors? Isn't every group in the state subject to that same rule? Okay. So look, if the case had ended there, there's been, I think, a pretty easy case, right? If you want a corporation in the state, follow the same rules as everyone else, put your directors' names in the books. But Alabama didn't stop there, Amy. They did more. What did Alabama demand as part of the litigation?
They wanted the list of members, names, and addresses for all members, not just the directors.
Correct. Why? Well, lots of questions ways. On paper, why do you think the AG asked for this information? In other words, what was the legitimate reason they cited for this information?
They said so they could adequately prepare for the hearing.
Okay. Do you think that was the real reason they requested this information?
No.
No. What do you think the real reason was?
Alabama has a history.
Yeah, they do have a history. And why do you think, again, I mean, just why didn't they want this info?
I think that they knew it would maybe have the impact that they were seeking to oust them from the state because they wouldn't.
And would this information have been produced in open court? Would these be public records?
Yes.
They would be. So unlike the California case we'll read about in a little bit, this was not like confidential. This was the opposite of confidential. This was like, we're going to disclose this for the entire state, everyone to see it. All right. So by seeking this additional information of all members of this group in Alabama, right, they gave a pretext. This was not the real reason why they needed it. I think we all can probably just sort of see through that for a little bit. Okay, but yes, they had to prepare for the hearing. We need to name everyone. Now, they didn't argue that, worried that there's fraud going on. We're worried that maybe members are being lied to. They could have maybe requested more target information, but they didn't. They asked for everything. Of course, the group refused to comply with the court order. There's no way in hell they can get the information over. And the courts held the group in contempt, civil contempt. I don't know if any fines were issued. I don't recall actually, but they held them in civil contempt of court. All right. So Jonathan, so the basis of the case then is this right of freedom of association. What was the NAACP's argument of why this right was being burdened?
That the effect of compelled disclosure, telling disclosure of all their members, is like chilling effect on members.
Chilling. What does this word chilling? The folding here. What does this word chilling mean?
Stop people from supporting it on
Okay. Would this be a result of any state action? In other words, is anything Alabama doing actually preventing or burdening people from joining this group?
No.
Where does the chilling effect come from?
Societal prejudice.
So non-state actors, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So the very basis of this entire topic is not that the government is burdening association. It's that non-state actors burden the association. Okay. The fear is that the government would give information to the White Citizens Council, which was a very large segregationist group who would intimidate members. By the way, 1958, this is like 3 years after Brown, right? This is right in the middle of things. So you can't sort of separate this case from the context of where you are, right? I mean, lawyers back then would go around with basically shotguns in their trunks because we're about getting lynched. It was actually extremely dangerous. But the fear was not coming from the police themselves, but from private citizens. Okay. The court then sort of walks through the text. And I sort of alluded to this before with my questionings, but they say there's this nexus, this connection between the freedom of speech and the freedom of assembly. And they say the freedom to engage in association is an aspect of liberty assured by the Due Process Clause, liberty. So this is probably mostly substantive due process. And it doesn't matter whether the speech is political, economic, or religious, or cultural. All these groups have the right to associate with whom they choose. And a compelled disclosure is a restraint on this association. And they keep talking about privacy, 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 privacy. Okay. Now, Anna, let me ask you a question. How did the organization show that there's a risk of harassment or threats or so on to its members? How did they show this?
They had evidence of economic reprisal, loss of employment, threat of physical.
Was this in the past?
Yes. On past occasions.
But I want to just stay on this for a moment. Had a state ever required the disclosure of their membership rolls before?
No.
So how do they know? I'm being somewhat opaque, but how do they know this would happen again? In other words, how do you prove something happened in the past will happen again? This becomes important for later.
They have shown that, I guess, on previous officers which was public knowledge, there had been threats and.
Okay. So we can all know what's going to happen, but I want to dwell on this point for a moment. There's at least some speculation that based on past actions, here's what's likely to happen in the future. We did Citizens United a couple weeks ago, and one of the issues there was disclosures, right? Remember, this ad was paid for by so-and-so, right? And only Justice Thomas dissented, saying that those those disclosures might result in harassment of people, right? And the majority said, oh, no, that's not the case. Come back to us if there's actually any harassment, and we'll consider it then. But we see in this case, as well as later cases, is the court's willing to accept speculation about what might happen based on past action. Right? Maybe the difference is this is not like a law. This is basically in the context of litigation. Only one group has to reveal their membership roles. Okay. All right. Now, the mere fact that there's a risk of harassment doesn't end the case. The state sometimes can have a really strong interest in requesting this information. We'll see in Buckley how they had such an interest. But here, Nick, is there such an interest in Alabama obtaining this information?
No, the court said that they didn't demonstrate an interest like substantial enough to warrant this.
Okay. What about divulging the names of the officers and directors? What about that? Can the state request that information?
I guess so they could, but
Yeah.
not like the ordinary rank and file.
Correct. So a minute ago we said they never even register in the state because they're probably afraid of reprisal. But here they say, okay, fine, we'll register. I don't know if they ever actually did. But at least they told the court that would be allowed. All right. So the holding of this case is that there's right of association within the 14th Amendment. And that association right extends to membership lists. And so the organization can actually assert this right on behalf of its members. Notice it's not that, X number of members, the Alabama chapter bringing this lawsuit, it's the chapter itself. So it's an associational right you can bring on behalf of your members. A lot of the cases we'll study in this chapter actually are associational cases where you have a group bringing a suit on behalf of their members. All right. Questions on the Alabama case? No? Okay, it's short. The reading day was actually, I think, blissfully short. I'm sure you'll agree. All right, let's go on. All right, Buckley against Valeo. Wait, Josh, didn't we do this case? Yeah, we did this case. This is one of the longest Supreme Court decisions in American history. It's like 300 pages. It's like it goes on for. I might be exaggerating, but it's extremely long. Just check the actual length. I want to make it up. How many pages was it? I can't find it quickly enough, but it was like a 300-page decision. It was very, very long. Buckley again was about FECA, the Federal Election Campaign Act, and we discussed it already. How it put limitations on campaign finance. So, who here remembers the difference between a contribution and an independent expenditure? Who remembers? Yeah, you're next. Yeah.
The contribution is actual money for the campaign.
Good.
An expenditure is paying for like some type of service or product that the campaign gets to utilize.
Okay, very good. Right. So the contribution is money given directly to the candidate or his campaign, whereas independent expenditure is money spent on the race, might be an outside group, might be an advocacy ad, and so on. Okay. So Buckley upheld the ban on contributions, but declared unconstitutional the ban on expenditures. Okay. But there's other aspects of FECA that were at issue, which is disclosure requirements. This is what we saw in Citizens United. When you actually gave money to one of these groups, you had to disclose to the government. This exists, by the way. If you actually go online, you can put anyone's name into a database and search if they made political donations. Right? It's contributions. It's a matter of public record. So to this day, this rule exists. Right? Dylan, why does the court in Buckley say that you can require disclosure of contributions, names and addresses for political contributions? Short opinion. So okay, so yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there in a second, right? From the outset, does requiring people to disclose their contributions, does that burden associational rights? In other words, if I give money to a political party, does that actually burden my associational rights?
don't believe so.
Why not? What if I give money to some sort of fringe party and I don't want people to know about it? If I donate money to the Communist Party of America, I may not be ready for that information to be public. Why can't? Doesn't that burden my ability to associate with some sort of fringe groups?
I don't know. I guess it does. I'm looking at more of like it takes away your right of privacy more than your ability to associate.
Well, what is
In-
what is this right of association? Isn't it a privacy right?
I don't know. I guess it could be the right to be let alone.
What do you think, Jacob?
Is that what I was saying earlier? That if you're associating with some group and it's maybe a controversial fringe group,
Yeah,
you maybe don't want people to know because
that
they're
burdens.
gonna-
Right. So I think the court acknowledges that requiring disclosures, at least for minority, for these sort of fringe groups, could burden your association. Look, if you're giving to the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, maybe people will be surprised. You might imagine a lifelong Democrat quietly writes a check for Donald Trump, right? It's like, I got him, right? That could lead to retaliation. Again, there is a risk that disclosing this information and contributions burdens your associational rights. Okay, but Shania, is that the end of the case? Does the case end there? No, why not? Correct. Very good. So the issue here is, how do you distinguish Buckley from Alabama, right? How do you distinguish these cases? And the reasons for exactly Shania said, the government's interest here is much, much stronger. Again, what was the government's interest in the Alabama case? They need to prepare for a hearing, which was just kind of like, okay, no, it's not, right? That's not the real reason why you want this information. But the government's interest here, something we've talked about, is to shine a light on corruption or the appearance of corruption. Again, it's a shining light on corruption or the appearance of corruption. So they follow the Alabama test and they agree that there's a burden. They don't really show what the burden is. Maybe they sort of speculate. But the reason why the government prevails here is because of the state interest, right? The state interest is of a great magnitude. And what are those interests? You show where the money's coming from and how it's spent. That way voters know who's funding a politician. And if you know who's funding a politician, that might tell you what kind of policies they support, right? It might tell you why they're backing this legislation versus that legislation. It can deter corruption. Because I know if I start writing these checks to this guy, if I disclose it, people might pick up on it. They might know about it, right? If I hand him a suitcase of cash under the table, well, no one knows about that. Also, the appearance of corruption, even if there's no actual corruption, people might think there might, what's going on? A little bit fishy, a little bit fishy. And also, there's a record-keeping requirement, right? Violating FICA is a crime, right? If you give too much money above a certain amount, that's actually criminal. Having these disclosures is a way of keeping everyone honest. I mean, look, maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe someone gave money on, January 1st, and then by the end of the day, they forgot. They gave another donation on December 31st. And they just constantly forgot, right? The disclosures prevents these sort of mistakes from being made, and so on. So look, even if there's a burden on this right of association, the interest is great. But then the court sort of talks at the end, has anyone's rights actually been burdened here? In the Alabama case, there were clearly articulated fears of people who will get harassed, beaten, killed, and so on, right? People can talk about this. But here, most donations are not very important. In fact, I think a lot of people are very proud of their donations. They make a point of saying, oh, wow, I give to all these politicians of how influential I am, right? Trust me, these people exist. You're not there yet, but you'll meet these people. They are very vocal of how much money they give. If you ever go to a political fundraiser, there's actually a list saying, here are all the people sponsoring this event. And here are the different dollar amounts they gave to support this event. And if you want to have a private lunch with a candidate, give this dollar amount. Trust me on this one. So for a lot of people, there's no burden at all. In fact, disclosing this is actually a positive. But again, for these sort of fringe groups, they call them minor party officials. People may, I don't know if I want to get my name associated with them. I want to help them out, but I want to do it so quietly. So if there's actually evidence, and the court says this, if there's actually a reasonable probability that disclosure will subject someone to threats, come back to us. So the court leaves open the possibility that on its face, the statute's valid, but as applied to particular people, maybe you have some flexibility. You have some wiggle room, right? It's sort of a weird thing, but the court's saying, we don't have anyone here today telling us this is bad, but if you do, come back to us and we'll think about it later. But that sort of requires bad stuff to happen and then you seek relief after the fact, right? This is like in Citizens United, if there's actual harassment, come tell us about it later, versus prophylactic, in anticipation of bad stuff, we're not gonna let this go forward at all. But here the court was unanimous, right? They said that the disclosure requirement was constitutional, but they don't require blanket validation. Okay. Questions on Buckley? So again, from Alabama, one second. From Alabama, they say you need to have, there has to be a burden and a very strong interest to justify it. In Buckley, big interest, no proof of a burden. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, the risk of one person being harassed for assembling or associating, does the court not care just because everyone else just chose to waive their constitutional right? We're not willing to protect the one person with some principalities.
Yeah, I think what they'll say is the fact that one person's harassed is probably not enough. The court says we'll look for a pattern of threats, maybe sufficient. So the fact that one person got harassed probably is not going to cut it.
So like right now, not right now, but like you have like a campaign cycle where it does it. It's not that the risk isn't that high, but political culture changes and the risk is now higher. Like that, you back to we were in the '60s.
Well, I mean, so this was referenced in Citizens United. Thomas also referenced it, but there was the Prop 8 case some years ago, right? This was actually a California ballot referendum in 2008 or so, which was said limited marriage to opposite-sex couples, and California voters passed it. California required disclosures of who supported this campaign, and people did this were basically put into a database of where these people live, where their businesses are. There were boycotts organized. People were threatened. They lost their jobs. So there were absolutely consequences for disclosing this. People supported the marriage campaign. And we'll get to Thomas's opinion, McConnell, in a few minutes. But he's very much worried that you're going to use these simple disclosures to attack people in perhaps the same way that disclosing the NAACP members would have attacked people in the 60s and 50s. Now, maybe think it's not a fair comparison. There's, maybe the violence is different, but Thomas definitely thinks the concern is the same. In other words, you don't have to have full-on, murders to justify the burden. It could be something less than that sort of targeting. All right. All right. Any other questions on Buckley? All right. So let's do McConnell. Again, we've done this case also. If you remember, McConnell concerned broad restrictions on broadcasts and communications involving election law campaigns. One of the requirements of the McCain-Feingold campaign finance bill was disclosures, right? You have to disclose who you are and who you gave money to. I give you a very short excerpt. You next? No.
I can't be.
No, I think you're next, right? You were last. No. I'm Eric. You next?
Yeah.
Were you last?
Yes, I was.
Okay, Eric. I'm sorry, guys. It's been a long day. Eric. So let's talk about McConnell. What's Justice Thomas's argument there?
And I don't know if you want to talk about real briefly, there's a modification, 304F, that modified 201, I think, of the...
I don't remember. Sure.
Yeah,
not important, but go ahead.
Right, but basically requiring that disclosure. And statement requires that every person who makes disbursement over 10,000 during a calendar year has to disclose it. And so Thomas takes issue with pretty much the court, and he thought the reason was too flimsy to toss away the interest in checking and not.
So let me just focus a little bit. Here, you're required to disclose the money they're contributing to various political campaigns or expenditures, right? Why does Thomas think those should be anonymous?
Well, I think he likens it to anonymous works entering the
Okay.
marketplace of ideas.
Okay, tell me.
So I think
Jamar, why does Thomas think having anonymous speech is so important?
That's kind of a argument on your head to disclose things that you might not have originally disclosed in the beginning.
He makes a historical argument, right? Why does he think, as a matter of history, anonymous speech is so important?
I have the simple interest in providing voters with additional relevant information. Does that sound about right?
No. By the way, McConnell is just announced he's stepping down as majority leader, so he's been in office for a long time. Aaron, historically, why is anonymous speech important?
If the Crown would have known every single name of every single American patriot or founding father, they probably would have just gone to their houses, taken them out of their homes, and thrown them
I think that's what Thomas is getting at, right? There's a reason why the Federalist Papers were published anonymously, right? A lot of the leading pamphlets from the Revolutionary were published anonymously because you had people who were afraid of having their views disclosed. The law in McConnell, as you recall, was about broadcasting views about candidates in particular. And for Thomas, the value of preserving that anonymous speech is so great that it trumps whatever state interest there is. Okay. So Thomas disagrees with Buckley. He thinks Buckley was wrong, and he says this very clearly. So he thinks the interest asserted in Buckley is not nearly enough to justify it, even though there's no specific allegations of threat. For Thomas, the mere possibility of threat is enough to justify the privacy right. All right. Now, Thomas doesn't address this. I wish he would. Whether this is a substantive due process doctrine, but that's sort of that ship sailed a long time ago. So questions on McConnell? Just get a one-page excerpt.
Do you think that the way Justice Thomas was kind of made a pariah at his prior to his confirmation to the Supreme Court might have something to do with the reason he's?
I think Justice Thomas's life story is very complicated. There's a lot going on there. If you want to read his biography called My Grandfather's Son, I would encourage you to read it. It's a remarkable book. But I think a lot of what Thomas goes through is probably based on his experiences and rejection from many groups in his societies. Yeah, I could teach an entire class on the question you just asked me, but I'll probably demur for now. That's a good question. All right, so in McConnell, Justice Thomas was alone, right? He was the only member of the court willing to take this position that the disclosure requirements were unconstitutional. In Citizens United 7 years later, he was alone, the only member of the court willing to take this position on disclosure requirements. One of the remarkable things about Thomas's career is that what often starts off as a lonely dissent becomes a majority opinion over time. I don't need to get on a Thomas soapbox here, but he's undervalued in ways we don't even appreciate. Where the court is today is based on Thomas's lonely dissents 20 years ago. And it's remarkable. If you go from Buckley, where it's basically 9-0 on disclosures, Citizens United 1 vote, to the AFP versus Bonta case, where he gets 6 votes for this position, it's sort of remarkable. Had the Bonta case come to the court 20 years ago, California would have won by a large majority. But I think Thomas has sort of sang this drum about anonymous speech, really shifted the tides. We see this in the Second Amendment. A decade before Heller, he had a dissent, a concurrence in Lopez, saying we need to revisit the Second Amendment. Right? In case after case, he says, in the appropriate case, let's think about this topic. And he writes about it. And that encourages law professors to write about it. And then many years later, it gets the majority of the court. So it's truly just, whether you like him or not, the long sweep of his career is remarkable. And he will soon be the longest serving justice. He's going to break the record. It's Justice Wheatland Douglas who has the record here. Thomas is going to smash it. Yeah.
Do you think that is why he ends up citing some footnotes in previous opinions?
Oh, he does that all the time. It's like, he says, I said this before, right? And he'll cite himself all the time saying, look, I've been saying this for years. Yeah. I mean, he was dissenting from denial of review. I mean, I think one of the first cases he ever wrote was a dissent from his very first case decided. And he's not afraid to be alone on these things. So I think the reason why we juxtapose McConnell and then Bonta back to back, showing sort of the progression. Okay. Any other questions on McConnell? All right, let's go on to Americans for Prosperity versus Bonta. AFP, if you don't know, is like a conservative activist group. They do a lot of funding for Republican causes. The other group was Thomas More Law Center. This is, again, a conservative group. They do a lot of religious liberty litigation and other things. So these are conservative groups who are afraid of California. And why do I mention that? I'm not drawing the analogy, but if you were a member of the NAACP in Alabama in the 1950s, you were not liked by the government, okay? The plaintiffs here claim that mantle. They say, we are like the NAACP in Alabama in the 1950s. Now, you might think that's a preposterous assertion, but that's how they view it. What's noteworthy, though, in this case is the NAACP did not file a brief. They were silent. They didn't say, I checked last night, they didn't file any brief. The ACLU did, but they're not the NAACP. I don't know why, but they didn't file in this case. All right. Ryan, you next?
Yes.
Facts, please, in Bonta. And by the way, Bonta was the Attorney General of California. I think he's now the Senator of California, if memory serves.
So California had a law on the books that if you were a charity and you were supposed to file the Schedule B form every year to disclose the names and addresses of the people that have contributed more than $5,000 in a particular tax year.
Mm-hmm.
This law was not heavily, or they were zealously enforced until 2010, when they decided to ramp up their efforts to enforce it on all charities, sending out thousands of deficiency letters telling all these charities.
Now, do they only send deficiency letters to conservative groups or groups across the spectrum?
I think they sent them all to everybody.
Right. So is this a case like in Alabama where they were targeting of all groups, right? The one civil rights group that was actually like, suing stuff. So was this like viewpoint neutral or was this across the board?
Neutral.
I think that's right. So, I mean, maybe one difference is this was not enacted to target any one group, right? This rule was issued to apply across the board.
Or was it?
Or was it? What do you mean?
I mean, or was the idea of going out to everybody just a smokescreen so that they could get the information that they wanted?
So you're saying is even if the request was neutral, it could be used in a targeted fashion.
Correct.
Maybe. All right, very good. Thank you for that, Ryan. All right, so just some background on tax law. Anyone ever follow 990 form, the nonprofit? Okay, so every nonprofit, not everyone, house of worship are exempt, but virtually every nonprofit has a file called a Form 990, which basically says, who are you, who are your officers, what's your address, and so on. Very basic information. If the contributions to a 501c3, a nonprofit above a certain level, you have to have Schedule B, which is basically a report listing all of your donors who contribute more than a certain amount each year. You have to send the IRS, the federal government, every year your 990 and your Schedule B. This case was not about challenging disclosure to the feds yet. After the case was filed, people start challenging this to the feds. Thomas Wright thinks that's unconstitutional, right? But this case was about giving the 990 form to the states, right? Now, Leighton, what happened that sort of made this case harder for California than it had to be? There was a whoopsie that happened that made this case a lot harder to litigate.
I'm not quite sure. Like, what, more difficult.
What happened with the California government that perhaps casts some doubt about why they need this information? Like, in other words, I'll just tell you. You know what I'm thinking of, Amy?
Is it the fact that it was the administrative fees that they were seeking for interest?
No, I'm thinking something very specific that happened, a whoopsie. No? What happened to the information that was put on the web?
Oh, did it get leaked?
Leaked. Leaked. Okay. So the risk always, right? The risk always with disclosing information is what happens to it. If it's just kept on some government hard drive, then who cares, right? But if it's used, as Ryan perhaps suggested, in a fashion to target people for subpoenas and the like, then it's not being used in a fair fashion. But worse, if the list is made public. Now, in the NAACP case, this was a court production being publicized in the courtroom. Okay? But here, California did a whoopsie. Their website basically allowed you to find the information, and it was really dumb, right? If you just modified some digits in a website link in the URL, you could get to the PDF, right? By the way, I figured this out like 14 years ago. On the Supreme Court, every case is a unique docket number, right? And it used to be that they would post a PDF, and the title of the PDF would be, SupremeCourt.gov/whatever, docket number.pdf. And I figured out that about a minute or two before the court posted a link to the PDF, they would post the PDF itself. So for about a week or two, I was able to get to the PDF like 2 minutes early by guessing the URL. They changed that real quick, but not smart enough. So this morning, actually, I'll show you this one, right? This is actually really bad. They posted the insurrection decision. And if you look at the PDF, right? Where is it? I didn't figure this out. A reporter from Slate figured this out. They're good for something. Where is it? So if you look over here, it says Sotomayor, Jackson, concurring in judgment, right? But if you search for dissenting, the word dissenting is there in the metadata. It was not in the original. They changed it concurring. So they messed up. They changed this to concurring, the original was dissenting in part. So again, the Supreme Court and PDF still have not figured out their game altogether. But my point is, with internet stuff, you disclose sometimes more than you intended to disclose. By the way, whenever you get a PDF, always go properties. You know about this? To see when was the document created, right? Who created it, and so on. So this document was created March 3rd at 9:32 a.m. That was yesterday. So documents created yesterday, right? And there's always more information you can find. So
So the Supreme Court doesn't have a form document that they just keep recycling like any.
I don't know. Well, they screwed this one up big time. Anyway, because that's actually really important information on whether this was a concurrence or a dissent. Anyway, going back to the topic at hand, once you give the government information, it's disclosed. You know what they're going to do with it. So there was a leak, and that made the government's case harder. Now, they say we have all these protocols to secure the data and so on. A guy just got indicted for leaking information from the IRS. So this one, what's the guy's name? Where's this guy? Yeah. So there's a guy working for the IRS who got 5 years in prison for leaking tax information on Trump and other people. So no matter how good your safeguards are, once you give a document to the public, to the government, just say bye-bye to it, right? It's gonna be out there, and you never know when it'll come back to get you. Okay. That doesn't mean Thomas is right. I'm just telling you, disclosures happen, whether it's an open court or not. Okay. Yeah, this guy gave Donald Trump's tax returns to various news outlets, got 5 years in prison. His name was Little John. Funny, wasn't there a tax evidence case called Little John? Something John, right? No, maybe a professional responsibility case, something John. Not important. All right, go back. All right, so let's walk through the opinion, right? The first aspect of the case that I sort of want to talk about is what exactly is a standard of review? And Lane, I'll come back to you for this one if I can. There's a lot of discussion about the standard of review. What does Chief Justice Roberts say about the standard review?
Basically, the Alabama case didn't really give a specific.
Did the Alabama case mention strict scrutiny or anything like that? No, it didn't. So what case tells us the appropriate standard review?
It was the Buckley case.
Did Buckley say what standard review we use?
Not that I remember.
No, it didn't. It didn't either. We didn't. It wasn't in your case, which is fair, right? What standard does the court adopt here?
They adopted an exacting scrutiny.
Oh man, we got intermediate scrutiny. We got strict scrutiny. This is on our list. Layton, what the heck is exacting scrutiny? It is a good question, right? Can you tell me what that means?
Chief Justice Roberts said that it is a substantial relation between the disclosure requirement and the sufficiently important document.
Okay. So we have this sort of new standard that doesn't fit anywhere. Thank you, John Roberts, but he always does. He makes stuff up. We have to learn how to teach, to pick up his mess. We have this standard called exacting scrutiny. And there must be a substantial relation between the disclosure requirement and an important governmental interest. So this is some sort of means ends balancing. We look at what's the state's interest and what's the burden, does it sort of shake out? All right. But we then get to this other element, right? How narrowly tailored does this law have to be? So, Amy, I want to ask you a question. Least restrictive means. What does this phrase refer to?
So there are alternatives available, the one that puts it on the interest.
So give me an example, right? If there's a disclosure requirement, right, where you have to disclose all the names of your donors, under the least restrictive means test, what would we ask?
What is the purpose of the?
What is the purpose? But how do we know if a disclosure requirement is the least restrictive means?
By knowing if there were other alternatives.
Ah, so if there's any other way of achieving the government's goal, any other less burdensome way to achieve the government's goal, do we have the least restrictive means here?
No.
Correct. This is, I think, a bit of a hard concept. We'll talk about this more in the religion context, right? Under the least restrictive means test, The government has one and only one option. They must pick the least burdensome rule. Again, the government must pick the least burdensome rule. If there's like a rule and another one that's like 1% more burdensome, you can't pick that one. So what is perhaps less burdensome than requiring all the donors to be disclosed? Well, maybe they can just request information as it comes up, right? That if there's concerns about fraud, they can say, okay, you know what, group, we have some suspicions. Give us your donors. In other words, don't request at the front end for all 60,000 groups in the state, whatever the number is. Request at the back end. Now, Jonathan, how does the California government respond to that sort of least restrictive means requirement? Right? Well, in other words, why may they not want to do that? Why? In other words, if the state was investigating a nonprofit, why might they may not want to ask for that information? I take it you've never been in a governmental investigation.
No.
Thankfully. Anyone's more cynical? Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So it's like maybe in CrimPro when you have a drug den and they hear a knock on the door, police, police. They run to the bathroom, they flush the stuff, right? Yeah. It's sort of like that, right? You think, yeah, right, yeah, exactly. There's a concern, which is not trivial, that if a group is under investigation for some fraud or something else, and they get a letter from the government saying, hey, can you give us a list of your donors? You go, right, right to the shredder. They start burning stuff, destroying records, and so on, right? The argument is that having this information at your disposal allows you to do a full investigation, and then you indict the bastards, right? Once you have all your ducks, you charge with a crime. You don't give them a courtesy call saying, hey, you know what? We think you guys broke the law. Can you give us some more records now? You can request that later. But if you apply the least restrictive means test, you're basically handcuffing the government, right? You're saying you can't have this info until you have a need for it. And by the time you have a need for it, it might be too late, it might ruin your investigation. Everyone sort of see that? So the Chief Justice Roberts rejects the least restrictive means policy. Okay. They reject the least restrictive means policy. Instead, they pick something in the middle. They only show that the rule must be narrowly tailored to serve the government's interest. Narrowly tailored to serve the government's interest. Anna, what does that sound like? Narrow tailoring. That should sound, I think, somewhat familiar to you, my smart common law students. What's that sound like?
Strict scrutiny.
Yeah, sounds like strict scrutiny to me, right? So why doesn't Robert just take strict scrutiny? I don't know.
To be that way.
Yeah, I just want to be that way. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for him. I'm sorry. Robert just confounds me on a daily basis. It's just it's like this cat and mouse game with him. I guess I'm the mouse. I don't know. They don't call it strict scrutiny, but it's strict scrutiny. I don't know the way to slice it. So if they apply narrow tailoring and substantial governmental interest, that is a heck of a lot, to me at least, like strict scrutiny. Okay. So then let's actually walk through the strict scrutiny analysis, or the exact scrutiny, as they call it, right? Why does this law fail strict scrutiny? Nick.
So, looking first at the government interest.
Okay, so what's the government's interest here? Is it substantially important? Is it really important?
It is.
It is, yeah. Yeah, what's the government's interest here?
Fraud.
Yeah, prevent fraud. Okay, so check, right? Why is it not narrowly tailored?
Because, have to discuss, they could have, if they're under investigation, then they could require.
But isn't that least restrictive means? Or is it still not sufficiently narrowly tailored? Is there a difference between that and this?
There is a difference. I guess you could say that, with narrowly tailored, it's okay if there's other options.
Let's try it. How is exacting scrutiny different than the least restrictive means?
I guess it talked about the government interest was to prevent fraud, but this law doesn't actually do that. So like you need to be able to prove that you can actually do what you're wanting to do, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the least restrictive way of doing it.
Okay, good. So let me try to put this into numbers, right?
Yep.
Let's say that there's 10 different ways of doing this, of getting this information. The least restrictive means test says you must pick number one, the least restrictive. Narrow tailoring means maybe you pick 1, 2, and maybe 3, but you can't pick 4 through 10, right? So you have a little bit more latitude under strict scrutiny, but not much latitude at all. It's just like a smidge more. I think does that make sense? That analogy with the numbers? Or imagine if you plot on a scale of 1 to 10, which one's most burdensome? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Least restrictive means is you pick number one. Narrow tailoring is maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3, but probably not. So all this discussion shakes out to basically nothing, right? All this thing of it, is it strict? Is it exact? Is it least restrictive means? It doesn't make much of a difference because narrow tailoring is not that much. A little bit different, just a smidge, but not much different. Okay, everyone with me? Go ahead.
Difference matter.
Tell me why.
I mean, whenever you're talking about the infringement on something's rights, if I can give the government, maybe I don't have to do, you don't have to get the full extremes, but I mean, let's try to get as close.
Not number one, maybe number 2.
Yeah, like,
that makes a difference, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could actually make a difference.
Now, in this case, I don't know what number 1, number 2 are. I'm sort of making it up, right?
Yeah.
Because number 1 seems to be disclosed at the back end, right? It seems to be just 2 options: requested up front or requested in the back end. I don't know if there is a number 2 option. It's basically you have 1 and 10. So it'd be a fun exercise to think of, what if you told the government, all right, come back and think of a less restrictive way of doing this that won't screw up your investigation, right? Maybe that exists, maybe it doesn't. I don't know, maybe they can ask the IRS for the information. Maybe that'd be even worse. Yeah.
Wouldn't the least restrictive means be for them to always just do nothing at all? Or is that 0?
I think that's 0. Saying, all right, fraud, that's cool, right? Whatever,
Like,
whatever.
No disclosure.
Because I mean, look, the way this works is they get complaints from the public that some group is doing a whistleblower, right? Someone's complaining, and they have to do something about it. And the first thing they would do with this law is, okay, let's look at the corporation, who their donors, right? Let's see who's giving the money. Maybe there's something going on. So I think the answer is they either request at the front end or they issue a subpoena down the road at the back end. I think those are their options. I'm not sure what the middle ground. Yes, sir.
What if California had shaped the law to be more tax related, so where they weren't saying they wanted to just gather information, but they wanted to confirm the California residents were making the right credit on their tax return?
But that goes to the state's interest, right? Whether the interest is strong. And the court said this is a very strong interest. I don't know that it goes to the narrow tailoring. So, I mean, maybe, Jamar, maybe one way you could do it, all of your taxes are due next month, by the way, just remember, right? When you do your tax returns, right, you have to, well, you don't have to, but you can list your disclosures to charities, right? Why? You get a tax write-off. You don't have to. In fact, there's no requirement to do it. So maybe what they could do is they can request from the California Tax Bureau lists of all the people who give donations to AFP. And maybe they can then cross-reference it or something. They can figure out that way. Maybe that's another way they can get the information. But it's not complete, because if I had to guess, people who are afraid of the donations being made public, we'll get to that in a minute, aren't going to volunteer this information to the IRS or the California government.
Well, then they wouldn't be able to claim whatever deduction.
So what? It's not the states. God bless Texas, no income tax here. I can't remember. Do states give deductions for charities under state income tax? Do you do tax? No. You do accountant?
I am a
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. It's good to have. I don't know. Maybe you can ask your friend in another state. Do states give write-offs for charitable donations? I should know the answer.
Because yeah, I was just trying to figure out a way that they could still get the information they want.
Maybe in the tax forms?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this was an issue. I mean, not to change the topic, with Donald Trump's tax returns, right? One of the reasons why the Congress and the New York District Attorney sought Trump's tax returns was to basically, well, different rationales, but to try to say, was he engaging in illegal activity? And the presumption is that tax returns are considered very private. We don't disclose these, right? Nixon, for example, leaked tax returns to punish his political adversaries. We saw this guy just a minute ago who leaked Trump tax returns, went to jail for 5 years. So, maybe, Jamar, that's even worse. Instead of just releasing, John Doe gave $5,000 to this group, you're releasing their entire tax return. That might actually be even more problematic. That might actually be like more burdensome than what they're doing here. Maybe. Okay, I will not ask you for tax advice, I promise. We have a clinic at the school. It's actually very good. They do a lot of really good work with that. It's actually, I'm really impressed how our school, they handle like hundreds of returns a year. So it's actually pretty cool. I use TurboTax. I'm lazy. It works. All right, where am I? Okay. So a lot of the case, though, focused on the distinction between a facial and as applied challenge. Let's start with Justice Thomas. Again, people can say whatever they want about Thomas, but the man is often on his own here, right? Who am I up to? Dylan. What is Justice Thomas's position? How does he differ from both the majority and the dissent, as usual?
Well, he said it does. I don't want to digress, but he said
That's fine. You can digress.
He said it does fall into the First Amendment. But
Yeah, he does.
the first cases we read were kind of like the 14th Amendment.
I'd love for him to explain it, but
He was worried about like the facial challenge being like overbroad and turning into an advisory opinion, being too powerful.
What's an advisory opinion?
Issuing an opinion before something happens.
Well, not just before something happened. What's an advisory opinion?
Without standing.
Good, without standing. Why? What's standing?
Standing having an actual like controversy.
Injury.
Issue.
Exactly, right? So do you cover this in con law, in standing? I don't teach it. I'm embarrassed to say I don't teach it, so I'll do it now. Maybe I should. I don't want to. There's not enough time. The very basis of court litigation is that you can't walk into court and just ask for an opinion, right? Say, hey, judge, is this bill constitutional, right? That we don't have that. In the state system, you kind of do, but not in the federal system. In the federal system, you can only go to court if there's a case or controversy. And the very basis of a case is just an injury, where one party injures another party, and the court can issue some sort of remedy to redress that injury, right? It's a three-part test: injury, causation, redressability, right? It's not a little familiar. So AFP argues, hey, our members will be burdened, will be harassed by California's tax, by the new IRS rule. Court, give us a remedy, right? Prevent the members from being harassed. Okay, so Thomas says, I'll just do that. For the members of AFP, there'll be no requirement to disclose your names. Done. The case is over. Jacob, does the court do what Justice Thomas says?
No.
What did they do?
They said that it was so overbroad because there were more, like, I don't know if they said there was more applications, but they just said there was applications on run offense.
Let's just review. What does overbroad mean? We've talked about that topic a few times before.
I don't. That overbroad does it not mean that
Over breadth? You might see in the cases.
Does it not just mean that parts of the law are unlawful?
What's over breadth, Shania?
I think that it's like when the law extends beyond what was originally intended.
I'm thinking of RAV versus St. Paul. Yes, sir.
It's vague.
No, not vague. What's the overbreath doctrine?
Cast too broad of a net for what it's targeting.
You're not wrong. That's what I'm looking for. So generally, the rule is that you can only challenge a law as applies to your speech, right? But what's the overbreath doctrine? Try it again. All right, you got to know this. So under RV versus St. Paul, there was a separate opinion by Justice White. And Justice White said, even if the statute can be applied to cross burning, in other contexts, the statute might be unconstitutionally applied, right? There's been a lot of speech that's protected that might be considered hateful. So even if you could criminalize cross burning, you can't prohibit other type. And the overbreath doctrine says that even if the plaintiff before you may not have the winning case, because there are other contexts where it may be invalid, we strike down the entire law, right? Because the statute's overbroad, right? Justice Thomas rejects the overbreath doctrine. Thomas says, wait a minute, we can only issue remedies. We can only remedy injuries that people claim. How can we go ahead and strike down a law when other people aren't being burdened, right? The other groups have not put forward any evidence that they're burdened. Only we have two plaintiffs, AFP and Thomas More. Thomas would limit the remedy to them. So Thomas rejects all overbreath doctrine. He would limit the remedy to the two named plaintiffs. But the majority strikes on the statute. Now, let me tell you something. I will never use this phrase, strike down the statute, because I think it's wrong. Listen to me. Don't use this phrase. It's wrong. If you look at my book, you'll never see that in my own words. Courts cannot erase statutes. All they can do is issue orders preventing the enforcement of a statute. It's a common myth that courts can erase statutes. They can't do it. Right? I'll tell you, I can prove it to you. Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional Texas abortion law. Did they erase it from the books? No, it's still there. And what happened with Dobbs? Roe v. Wade was overruled, and the Texas law sprung back into life. Courts cannot erase statutes. If Lawrence v. Texas is overruled tomorrow, guess what? Sodomy statute is still in the books. They'll come back to life. Courts do not strike down laws. Yeah, Ryan.
Could you back up to the threat doctrine again? So, excuse me, Thomas was saying that because there's only two people affected by this, that there is no potential for this to, there's no potential for another context for this. Is that what he's saying?
What Thomas says is that if your members are being bothered, come to court, seek a remedy. We can't give you an anticipation of every single group in the state. Right, so Thomas would limit the remedy to the named plaintiffs and then their members. Okay, but the majority says no instead. This statute is facially unconstitutional. Facially unconstitutional. The statute is on its face unconstitutional. Now the problem, and Justice Sotomayor makes a very, very big deal about this. Who's next? I lost track of where I was. Eric. All right. I like your honesty. Honesty is very refreshing. I appreciate that. Eric, so let me ask you this question, please. The problem with a facial challenge is that the record evidence only shows a threat of risk of these two groups. Is there any evidence in the record that other groups might have their members facing threats or reprisals? How does the majority respond to that?
They talk about that, I believe, the risk of chill.
The risk or the probability, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Is there any guarantee this risk will actually happen? But why does the majority think it's good enough to happen?
mind repeating the question?
Why is the majority so sure that this will result in risk of, harassment and threats and the like?
Well, there was a showing from AFP that they were being threatened, but
But do they have risk for these other groups, for the other 50,000 nonprofits in the state? Yeah, good.
I guess because California says they're gonna ensure confidentiality, but the Supreme Court says there's no way to.
We don't believe you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't believe you. Sharon, let me ask you a follow-up, please, if I can. In Buckley, remember that this passage in Buckley is saying that, if there's specific risks, come back to us, right? And we will be sympathetic to those claims. Is the court's opinion here in the facial challenge consistent with Buckley?
I'd say no, it's more preemptive.
Good, preemptive. I like your word choice. Yeah. This is preemptive. It's forward-looking. Yes. Good. Yeah. So as a consequence of the overbreadth doctrine, they don't require case-by-case evidence. They're saying that we think the risk here is so big for every possible nonprofit that we're going to strike in that for everyone. Now, again, there might be nonprofits that don't care about this. I noted the NAACP did not file a brief in this case, even though they were the beneficiaries of this case 70 years earlier. They did not file a brief, which is significant. They usually file a brief in most big cases. But the court said for all groups, you not benefit from it. There was no need to show individualized risk of harassment. So the discussion in Buckley, I think, as Jamar said, I think he's right that this is a departure from the prior precedent. All right. So everyone get the Roberts majority opinion. Roberts, he's very tricky. If you don't read him carefully, you think, oh, this just makes sense. This is all clean. Well, when you have these sort of cases, one after the other, you can sort of see how the court twists and turns. Even when Roberts rules the way I like, I still don't like it. And I feel like I'm always being cheated. I'm getting like an empty plate or something. It's just the food's not really there. I'm just getting served something. Okay. Let's go to Alito and Gorsuch had a very short dissent. Very short concurrence. And they say we would use strict scrutiny, but it doesn't matter because the result's the same, which I think is probably right. I don't see a material difference between what Roberts does and what the concurrence says. It's the same, but Roberts just doesn't want to call it strict scrutiny because for who knows. All right, Aaron, what is Justice Sotomayor's dissent? What's her argument there?
They didn't implicate the First Amendment.
I'm sorry?
That the charity didn't, demonstrate an actual First Amendment burden.
Burden, good. That's what I was looking for. Burden, right? Does Sotomayor think all the burdens are equal from these various groups? In other words, does she think that a member of the Alabama chapter of the NAACP in 1957 stands in the same position as a person who donates to, the Americans for Prosperity 2024 in California? No, of course not. Why not?
Historical precedents.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can just be candid, right? The first example, you're risking lynched, right? Murdered on the street. The second example, maybe at risk of, some nasty social media posts, right? Maybe you get canceled, right? Maybe get deplatformed. I don't know, right? But the burdens, I think, are not the same. The majority is it doesn't matter, right? That you don't need to have risk of death or life of limb to justify the associational rights. And so Sotomayor says, yeah, you need something more than this. She says that burdens are contextual, right? And you need to sort of balance how important the interest versus the burden here. And she says here, the burden here is speculative and not even that great. And she says for a lot of people, they actually might be proud of their disclosures, or maybe they're agnostic, they don't care. Having this subjective risk of chill is not enough. So I think Sotomayor would basically let the law go into effect, see what happens, and people come saying, look at our members being burdened, give us relief. The challenge, though, is what Thomas said in Citizens United. Once the lists are out there, it's too late, right? You can't get it back. So again, once you have the government document, it will be released and you don't know what's going to happen. Okay. Sotomayor would also use not strict scrutiny. She would use more flexible. So when she says exacting scrutiny, she would use it much more flexibly. Okay. She also discusses we're not going to use this facial unconstitutional standard. She would give relief only, if at all, to the named parties. Okay. Questions on the Sotomayor dissent? All right. So let me wrap up today's class. I'll talk about the exam for a little bit because we're at the halfway point. This freedom of association topic really manifests in a couple different ways. The first topics we'll be talking about today concern membership lists. And I think the rule as we have it now is that you apply this sort of exacting scrutiny, which looks a lot like strict scrutiny. When you're deciding whether there's burdens or risks, you can be speculative, you can basically guess, and you can give relief to an entire statute, not just the named parties. In all these cases, the court assumes that the state's interest is important. So really, the entire ball of wax is on the narrow tailoring. Is there some way of accomplishing this that's less burdensome? Okay. The topic for next class, which I guess we after we get back from spring break, which would be like 2 weeks from now, which you only remember me saying this, has to do with funding. Okay. So let's say you're an employee for the government. Let's say you work for a teacher, and you're a member of a teacher union, and you pay dues, right? Anyone remember a union here?
I was for
Public or private?
public.
Okay. Did you pay dues?
Yep.
Did you appreciate paying those dues?
Nope.
No. Did you have much of a say what those dues were used for?
Nope.
No. Okay. Were those dues used for things that maybe you didn't agree with?
Yep.
Okay. So very often when you pay dues, some of it's used for negotiations and worker training and things like that. But also dues might also be used to engage in politicking, right? To support candidates, to support causes, and so on, right? The auto workers endorse so and so for president, right? All unions do this. So what if you're an employee for a union and you don't agree with this? If your money is being used to support certain candidates, is that your way of endorsing those candidates? In other words, are you being forced to endorse speech you disagree with by having the dues taken from your salary? So that will be the subject of the next line of cases. The third line of cases, which I frankly didn't assign because I don't know how much juice they have, concerns associating with who's in your club. Right? So let's say you are a member of the Christian Legal Society. We have a chapter at this law school. And let's say that you don't want to admit members who favor gay marriage. And you do that at a public institution. Supreme Court said, no, you must admit everyone. And it's a really complicated opinion. I don't teach it for that reason. But there's actually some limits on who you have to admit. Do the Boy Scouts, again, have to admit gay troop masters? This is a long time ago. Now they admit everybody, right? But there was a time where the Boy Scouts said, no, we don't have to admit them. The court agreed. Do the JCs, which is a civic organization, have to admit women? Court said yes. Those cases are all over the board. I don't teach them because I think they're not really relevant anymore. But there's a line of cases about who you have to admit to your club. So again, with association, it's membership lists, right? Using money to support candidates and who you admit to your group. Those are the three sort of categories we have in this topic. I'm only going to teach the first two. The third one, just I think the case law is sort of passed by the wayside. All right, any questions so far? Okay. So let's talk about the exam for a few moments, which I know you all care about deeply. If you go to the syllabus, I have a couple different documents. I have the exam from 2019. In 2021, during the throes of COVID, during those dark ages, I wrote a sample midterm, which I don't actually give to you, but you should take a look at. I'll show you in a minute, and a final exam. The exam, where is it? I show you the midterm to start. Okay. The exam and the midterm are going to have the same format. It's a 2-hour midterm. Okay. Open book. Bring whatever you want. It will not help you. I mean that sincerely.
Remember that from the first class. It will not help.
It won't help you because the sorts of questions I'm asking you are not in your book. Now, if you, it's open book. It's not open computer. Do not use any generative AI. Please don't, we'll catch you. Maybe we won't, I don't know. Right, I say there's an empty threat, but please don't use it. There's a word limit, okay? 1,000 words. That is a ceiling. Anything you write above 1,000 words, I will not read. So I stopped reading 1,000 words, okay? Please don't go to the word limit. There's a word count feature in your exam soft. Please figure out how to use it. If you don't, then whatever. Please don't handwrite. I don't like it. It doesn't help you. It never works well. I've only ever had one student handwrite who actually got a good grade. It happened once. I remember she had beautiful handwriting too, right? But just type it. You have to type the bar exam, okay? Closed computers has to be printed, unfortunately. Okay. I ask two types of questions. I don't know which exam I'll ask if I've written it yet. I will write the exam after the last day of class. I will not do it before class. I'm a bad bluffer. I had 1 year student say, Professor Blackman, is such and such an exam? I'm like, So I haven't written it yet. I don't know. I can't tell you. The exam will take one of two formats. The first format is the year is 2024 today. I want you to apply the law as it exists today. The other type of question I'll ask you is historical. In this one, the year is 1970. What does that mean? You're only able to use the cases decided as of 1970. And I don't pick these numbers arbitrarily. I mean, all the cases in your book have years in them. So as you make sure you put together your outline, one thing a lot of my students do is they put chronological listing of the cases. It's not hard. All the cases have years in them, right? And that way you know what your cutoff is. Don't talk about things that happen after this. Okay. So this one, the question was the year is 1970. There was a Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. There's always Texas. A series of laws to reduce communism, blah, blah, blah. 1,000 words, 5 issues. There's always 5 issues. Questions 1 through 4 will be what you might call doctrinal, where they're looking at, trying to figure out what the level of scrutiny might be, right? Trying to handle a religion issue or so on. The 5th question is always kind of a policy question. I'll just jump to that one first. This one, this is about January 6th. I remember this one. Oh man, I was topical on this one. Insurrection. Good, but it'll be something like this: express the pros and cons, right? Have a bigger policy issue, not solely the who wins, but a policy issue. Okay. So when you're thinking about these exams, what I often do is I'll like put 2 different topics together. Like I might combine an issue about, free exercise of religion and, slaughtering of animals for religious ceremony, right? Which has crush films, right? Filming animal sacrifice, but also religious component. So I'll kind of take one or more cases that you studied and sort of like smash them together in a way that's not obvious. Okay. Now, if any of you want to do this exam, come to my office and talk about it. Happy to do that. Happy to talk with you. I'd encourage you to do it. I think, to be honest, I may have removed like 1 or 2 cases from 2020 from the syllabus, but if you're pretty similar. So I think you should be able to do the midterm without much difficulty. I think we have more or less. Question 5 actually might be hard because I didn't do the JC's case, but at least 1 through 4, you should be okay. Yeah, you can do 4. You can do 3. Yeah, this is a cockfighting case. It's like the Stevens case. You can do this is campaign finance. Yeah, I think you can do questions 1 through. Yeah, you can do questions 1 through 4. Question 5, I don't think you can do, but 1 through 4. If you want to do it, come to my office. Happy to look at it for you. We're going to be doing a review session the last day of class. Now, you're welcome. It'll be on Zoom. The last day of class is on Wednesday, the 20. What is that? It's like that weird last day, which is Wednesday, the 24th, right? Because the last day of class usually is going to be on the 23rd, but there's a special makeup day because we have 2 holidays to start the semester. So there'll be a Zoom class review on the 24th. I'll probably go over that exam or maybe one of their finals. I haven't decided yet. Okay. All right. And just so you know, there's a holiday of Passover, which is on the 22nd, so no class that day, and I think we'll be all right. Okay. Questions? That's all I got. Have a good day. I'll see you all next week. Enjoy spring break.